welcome back. So I'm starting a new playlist, and in this playlist, I'm going to be building a 2D massive multiplayer online role-playing game. So one thing you should know is that there have been a lot of different ones over the years. Nowadays, of course, they're all 3D. They've kind of fallen out of favor. They're not really that huge of a market share anymore. People have gotten away from them. It's more now the survival and the crafting and the a multiplayer, but not massive multiplayer. So that's fine. But 2D has fallen back into favor, and independent game design is stronger than it's ever been because of the tools that we have at our disposal and the power of the computers now to be able to run these tools without having to do all sorts of coding tricks and graphics tricks and image tricks in order to make things work. You don't need a whole team anymore to make an indie game. You can actually do it yourself, as in my other playlists I've been showing you with GDevelop, and I'll be showing some Unreal Engine, some Game Guru Max, etc. But this playlist is going to be on the Intersect engine. Now, the Intersect engine comes from a long line of 2D engines that started based on the Eclipse. And the Eclipse engine was very long in the tooth, and this designer of Intersect has decided a few years ago, I think it was 2016, he started on the project, and I think he's kind of rebuilt it a couple times. I think he took a big restart in 2019. Don't quote me on that, but he's definitely done a lot of work. So the engine is at a really good spot right now. The one thing, though, that is horribly lacking is good, thorough documentation and good, thorough tutorials. That being said, there is documentation to a certain point. There is not so much documentation and of tutorials, but there is a lot of the technical documents and stuff is also in there in his wiki and stuff if you dig around. And in the forums there is some documentation, but it stops at a certain point and then leaves to be completed, to be completed, to be completed, through a whole bunch of crucial things that you need to know to get up and running this engine, especially if you're new to 2D mmorpg design, 2D game design, or just game design in general, and you want to get up and running. Now, the Intersect engine has some followers from time to time that come on, make a few videos on YouTube, but they always tend to stop when it starts getting harder. You know, they'll do a whole bunch on the tile sets and on this and that and whatever, and then they get to a certain point and just they fizzle out. They don't do anymore. Or you get some where they show off what they've done in the game. They briefly touch on stuff, a few in other languages, I believe Brazil, Portuguese. But there are some out there, but they're not very thorough with how you can do something. So I'm going to do a tutorial series that's a work-along series, and I promise to cover what you need to get up and running for a game, all the aspects of a game. I am not going to sit here and pretend that I am like some incredible expert on this system and I know every detail inside and out and I can make any event system do anything I want on the first try. In fact, you're going to see me struggle with a few of these things on the screen, trying to remember how to do them, back and forth. There's a few things like the quest editor that looks like it works this way, but then you've really got to like go, oh, no, this does this and prompts for this, and this is what you get after this happens. So there's things like that, and I'll explain those as I go along. And I'll also explain the editors, and I'll explain all of that. So where I'm really going to start with is basically, I also need to put out a disclaimer that the artwork I use in this series, some of it is commercial, some of it is personal use, some of it is stuff that I've made, some of it is stuff that I found images for that are like open rights or whatever, or placeholder art, or even free art that you're allowed to use for whatever you want. Then I've highly modified it, or I have taken it and I've actually made full animations and things out of it, and it's no longer even anywhere close to the original artwork. Just basically an outline trace point for me to pixel paint. So that being said, I do use products that are designed for something else. I do use 3D rendering, like out of Unity or Game Guru Max, and I will take those and turn those into tile sets. I will use dungeon campaign tile sets, and I will turn those into other tile sets in more of like a 6x6 grid. I try to do everything in a 6x6 grid because I'm using a 50x50 tile size rather than the stock 32x32 tile size. And we'll get into that in just a second. So that's my disclaimer. Full disclaimer, this is not a for sale item. At some point, if people really want to play it and they really want to support me, I might set up a Patreon, and then that will give you some in-game items or whatever, some bonuses, and it'd be some like measly amount, like $1 a month or so, just something to support my time to develop the game further and to keep the story going. So that being said, I'm not going to show you like so much my work in this particular video. We'll pick that up in the next video. But in this video, what we're going to do is just show you how do you get running out of the get-go, because this is the introduction video. So you download and you extract the Intersect engine, and that is what we've got right here on my desktop. This is the Intersect engine. You open that folder, and right here, server, documentation, client. Documentation, there's no documentation. It's just licensing. You go into here, you look at any of these, license. So now the only documentation, oh, sorry, let me go back into there, is this link, which takes you back to the website. And that, like I said, is complete to a certain point, and then from there, it kind of leaves you hanging. They haven't done a whole lot of work on that. I wish they would, but it is something the developer is a programmer, and he's working on the engine. He's got a day job. It's, you know, it's a labor of love for him, so I understand why he hasn't done it. I was kind of hoping some community members would pick it up, and that's why I'm doing this series, because I want to make sure people can get into this engine, enjoy it for the fun that it is, and make some really good stories. So the server, oh, out of the documentation, sorry. The server, you just run this, and it runs locally on your machine. Now, there is a migration process to be host that on another machine. You change IP addresses, you change configs and things, which is great, gets you up and running, and you can go from SQLite, which it's based on, and you can migrate it into full SQL. You can even host it on a Linux box. There are forum articles, really well done by the developer, how to do that process. I've done it before. I may do a video on that near the end. We'll see. But for now, I just want to get you up and running with this and familiar with all the areas. So the one thing that I will say that I did do was I did make some changes to my server. So if we go in here and we open config old, and you can see here on the screen, this is the config file. It's a JSON file. Now, as I scroll down, there's all sorts of things that it handles. You can control your equipment, your paper doll, your left, up and down, your move, what things are what. Now, this is just basically how to call. So you've got a paper doll for armor, you've got a paper doll for helmet, weapon, shield, whatever. And you can actually set these up and configure them differently than you want to. I see no reason to. I mean, unless you're doing something like a spaceship game, and then of course you don't have helmet, boots, and armor, you're going to have like starboard hull, starboard wing, port hull, port wing, aft, you know, you're going to have all these other things, right? So there's no real reason with a default type of game with any humanoid or quasi-humanoid or robot to change any of these. So we're going to scroll right past them. Now what we are going to do is stop here at tool types. So you see there's axe, pickaxe, shovel, fishing rod. Now this is important, and I'm showing you this before we get into the game, just so you have this in mind. You need to, whenever making a massive multiplayer game, you need to figure a few things out ahead of time. Now, a few of those is what genre, what class. I mean, you can even play with some of that flowing along, but are you going to be fantasy based? You're going to be gun shooting, you're going to be giant robots, spaceships, whatever. You need to make your tool types. Like if you're making a Star Trek game, then you're going to need, I don't know, a flux capacitor alignment tool, a tricorder tool, or whatever. But here, for these, they've got these basic ones down. their crafting system inside, I wanted more features. I wanted to be able to take it further. So I have added to my crafting tools, I have added a sickle, and I have also added a skinning knife because I want to be able to harvest deer skins by processing. I want to be able to process flax and stuff like that, or resource gather. So how these are set up, you just add extras. But be careful because configuring JSON files, spacing, and the tabs are important. It's better to just copy, enter, paste, and then edit. Change that axe out on the second line to whatever, I don't know, lockpick set, whatever you want. Anyway, that is important because you need to plan that out ahead of time and add those in. That's best practices. You can add them later, but best practice, get an idea what you're doing, flow chart it out, throw it on a whiteboard, whatever, spreadsheet it, figure out how you want your game flow to go with your craft. Are you going to be heavy survival? Are you going to be heavy crafting? Are you going to be light crafting? Are you going to need no tools to craft or process? Like, are you going to be able to just take a bunch of deer skins that you pick off from a drop and turn that into a leather hide just simply by going to a leather tanning station? Done. You don't need any tools to harvest it all. You know, that's up to you. There's a vast amount of flexibility within the system. But this is important down here. So when you migrate over later, you're going to need to put in a username and a password to connect to your real SQL database because you're just SQLite at this point. So this will change to SQL. The local host will change to the IP address of the server, which it could still be local host if you're hosting the whole thing still, but you have the scalability that you could fire up a Proxmox server, throw out a SQL database over here, and you could be connecting to that from a completely different server that's handling all the other processing communications. You can split your load. So there's a lot of things you can do, and there's a lot of things that high-end people do. Or you just slap it on some spare box you got, get it up and running in Windows, and walk away from it. You still have to change the IP address on the client side to point to the server, and the editor side to point to the server. However, you won't have to change any of that. That's simply if you're going to migrate over and host it somewhere else on its own SQL database. Now, down here, the map. So, the map itself is composed of a whole bunch of areas. Each of those areas is roughly, well, it is 26 tiles tall by 32 tiles wide. Now, by default, that it might be an acre, might be a half an acre. I'm not sure. It's a pretty good size though. Like when you putting on the buildings and things. I mean, unless you're putting ginormous, it all depends on your tiles, right? But basically, for most people's use, they're going to be using the Japanese orthographic view mode. It's like your standard Japanese RPG mode. Think the original Zelda games. Think the original Final Fantasies 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. Think the original Phantasy Star Online. Those type of games, right? Top-down Japanese role-playing games. You're running around the map with very, very 8-bit graphics. Anyway, that being said, that's basically the area you're going to be covering using those. Now, I have changed mine to my tile height by 50 by 50, right here, 50 by 50 instead of 32 by 32. And that is the actual individual tile size, whereas the each area is 26 by 32. And I can hear you now, some people are going, well, that's not nearly big enough. I mean, even if that's half an acre, that's not that big. And I changed mine to 50 by 50, so it is a bigger area. It does scale out to be a bigger area, but that also presents problems. The reason I did that for me is because my tile sets that I'm making, it just worked out really good to do grids of 6 by 6 for my structures in pre-made grids of pre-made buildings, which I'll open one up here. This is my roads, just so you can, oh, wrong one, sorry. That's my OBS Studio. This is my roads. Let's put OBS Studio back up here. Sorry about that. And you can see here that on these roads, I've got little fences here, little turnouts. But this grid is 50 by 50. So this little area, rather than lay out little tiles that can be interchanged on with every tile to come up with different patterns and stuff, I've wanted to go for more of a, now mine is a true top-down, not an orthographic top-down, but a true top-down view game. But I've wanted to go for more of a Diablo-esque feel or the original Lineage feel. I played a lot of games on that original Lineage. So I wanted my graphics to be not so, I guess not blocky or plain, or I guess 8-bitty is the best way to describe it. I mean, for lack of. And you can see here that I've got, you know, there's some fruit down here, there's a rock, there's fence posts. Road patterns, the grass and stuff. I'll scroll in a bit here. And you can see, even though we're down on the original pixels, and each one is, these grids is a 50 by 50, I've got my 6 grids by 6 grid areas, and then I could take those as blocks and line them up. Now, be warned, if you do this methodology, some people do this methodology and they lay down a whole area as a picture and fill it in as a tile. And that's going to render that out for every area. But that's going to be really heavy on your resources because every area you go to is now a whole different set of blocks based on a whole different tile set that is like the area itself. So what I've tried to do here is compromise. I've got 6 by 6 essentially tiles that I can interlock. The only thing is I can't rotate these in place, so I can't just use one. So I've had to do left, right, up, down, and I've done that across the board and made these tile sheets. Now these tile sheets, I've made them with the spacing to basically accommodate the measurements of the engine. So we go back into here, and you can see the height is 26. Well, I've made the maps basically just a little bit bigger than that, and actually a little bit smaller than that. I think I made them at 23. Anyway, just to fit with one tile, empty tile, as a border in between my sets so that it's easy to grab and drag. I don't know that I even need those, but to snap to grid alignments, I definitely need them. So that being said, that's why I've done 50 by 50, because I'm going to be using 6 sets of 6 by 6 tile sets as a tile set, or as a tile. So a little different. So I'm meeting somewhere in the middle of the resources of doing the whole thing as individuals or doing them as little tiles. Now, I know there's not the recommended method, and I know it's hard on resources, but our computers are getting pretty powerful. Our bandwidth is pretty good. Our file sizes, we've got lots of memory now. I don't see it's going to be an issue. I think it's going to be fine. But if I didn't do it that way, and if I had laid them all out, then I would have definitely run into a problem having hundreds of maps for hundreds of areas. This way, at the end of the day, I might have 60, 70 maps, and they're reused in many, many, many areas in the game. So not as reused as just a few tile sets are with the little individual squares, but meeting in the middle. So you get the idea. You get what I'm after there, and I'm hoping it works out. The other thing now is just, I'm going to run the server. You just fire it up. The one thing in the server is once it's running, you fire up the client and you create an account, and then with that account you log into the server. And that client is just up here in the client and editor. The editor is for editing, but you can't go in and edit until you have a client. So now that my server's up and running, I'm just going to minimize him, and I'm going to log into the client. Now I've already done some editing. You're going to hear this. Log in. But that's fine. Anyway, you would log in. I'm going to close that down now. You would log into there, create your first time you've logged in, your character is automatically going to be an admin. But if it's not the first time you've logged in, you need to come into here, and you need to, in the server, put in this power command. And what you do is you can set the level to 2 of the player that you created, and then that player now will become an administrator account. So just be aware of that. And exit you out of the client, and that is where you would then fire up you would have the server running in order to access the client or the editor. But after you have your administrator account created in the client, then you are ready to open the editor and you can work. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you can have the editor and the client open at the same time, work back and forth between them. Occasionally, though, you have to save and close the editor and reopen it in order for that to take effect in the client. But the client generally doesn't need to close as long as the server stays running. Once in a while, I do it just in case something isn't working. I'm troubleshooting it, but that's that. So that's where I'm going to end this introduction video. We're going to dive into the editor in the next video, and we are going to talk about laying down tile sets and just go over a basic overview of the editor first and lay down some tile sets, and we will get you started. So on that note, I'm going to end this video, and we'll pick it up in the next one.